August 9th, 378 AD, a date etched in history as one of the Roman Empire's darkest days. On a scorching plain near the city of Adrianople, in modern-day Turkey, a Roman army led by the Emperor Valens himself was not just defeated but utterly annihilated. This wasn't just another loss on a distant frontier. This was the Battle of Adrianople, catastrophe so profound that it shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and set the empire on a path from which it would never fully recover. So how did this happen? How did the supposedly unstoppable Roman legions meet such a disastrous end? And why do historians consider this battle a pivotal moment, the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire? Let's dive deep into the story of this monumental clash. Our story begins not with a battle, but with a refugee crisis. In the late 370s, a people known as the Goths, specifically the Tervingi and Greuthungi tribes, were facing their own existential threat. They were being pushed from their homelands north of the Danube River by the terrifying advance of the Huns, a nomadic warrior people sweeping in from the east. Desperate and terrified, the Goths looked south to the Roman Empire. The Roman commander Lupicinus tried to assassinate the Gothic leaders Fritigorn and Alavavus in a treacherous plot. The leaders escaped, and the news of this betrayal spread like wildfire. The Goths, who had been pushed to the edge, finally exploded in a furious rebellion. What began as a plea for asylum had now become an all-out war. The once supplicants were now a rampaging army, plundering the rich, undefended farmlands of the Balkans. They weren't just fighting for land anymore. Were fighting for their survival and for revenge. Emperor Valens, who had been campaigning in the east against the Sassanid Empire, was furious. He saw this not as a consequence of his officials' failures, but as an act of barbaric treachery. He broke off his eastern campaign and marched his veteran field army west, determined to crush the Gothic rebellion and make an example of them. This was a personal matter for Valens. He was overconfident, eager for a glorious victory to cement his reputation. Even ignored the advice of some of his generals to wait for reinforcements from his nephew, the Western Emperor Gratian, who was on his way after securing a victory against another barbarian tribe on the Rhine. Pride, as we'll see, comes before a fall. On that fateful August morning, Valens' scouts reported that the Gothic force was only about 10,000 strong. This was a critical piece of misinformation. The main Gothic force was much larger, and a huge contingent of their formidable heavy cavalry, mostly from the Greuthungi tribe, was away foraging. Believing he faced a smaller stationary enemy, Valens decided to attack immediately. He was impatient, spurred on by court flatterers who urged him to seize the glory for himself before Gratian could arrive and share it. He ordered his army, already exhausted from a long morning's march under the brutal summer sun, to advance on the Gothic wagon laager, a defensive circle of wagons that served as their mobile camp. The battle began chaotically. Some of the Roman units attacked prematurely without orders, throwing the Roman lines into disarray before the main engagement even began. The Roman infantry, tired and thirsty, struggled to maintain formation as they advanced. They were met with a hail of arrows and javelins from the Goths, defending their wagon circle. They pushed the Gothic defenders back, almost breaking into the laager itself. The battle hung in the balance. The disciplined formations that had been the secret to Roman military success for centuries completely broke down. In the midst of this carnage was the Emperor Valens himself. Accounts of his final moments vary. Some say he was struck by an arrow and died on the field, his body never identified amongst the heaps of the slain. A more popular story tells that he was wounded and carried by his bodyguards to a nearby farmhouse. The Goths, unaware the emperor was inside, surrounded the house, and when met with arrow fire from the roof, set it ablaze, burning Valens and his retinue alive. Either way, the emperor was dead. A Roman emperor had been killed in battle against a barbarian foe for the first time since the 3rd century. The shockwave was immense. The aftermath of Adrianople was catastrophic. An estimated 20,000 to 30,000 of Rome's best soldiers, including 35 high-ranking commanders and the emperor himself, were wiped out in a single afternoon. The Eastern Empire was left virtually defenseless. This wasn't just a loss of manpower, it was a loss of experience, of leadership, of an entire veteran army that took years, even decades, to train. The empire simply couldn't replace these men. The backbone of the Roman military was broken. The strategic consequences were immediate. With the field army gone, there was nothing to stop the Goths from roaming and raiding the Balkans at will. They even made an attempt on Constantinople itself. The new emperor, Theodosius, had no choice but to adopt a radical new policy. He couldn't defeat the Goths militarily, so he co-opted them. In 382 AD, he signed a treaty that allowed the Goths to settle within the empire, not as subjects, but as an autonomous nation within a nation, serving in the Roman army under their own commanders. This set a dangerous precedent. It signaled a fundamental shift in Roman policy, from assimilation to accommodation. The army became increasingly barbarized, relying on large contingents of allied barbarian troops who were often of questionable loyalty. The idea of a unified Roman military, loyal to the emperor and the state, began to erode. This process would accelerate over the next century, with Gothic generals like Alaric, who may have even fought as a young man at Adrianople, eventually rising to prominence in 10 AD, sacking the city of Rome itself. So, why was Adrianople the battle that shattered Roman military power? It wasn't just the staggering loss of life, it was the psychological blow. The myth of the invincible legion was dead. It was the strategic vacuum it created, leaving the heart of the empire vulnerable. And most importantly, it was the long-term policy changes it forced upon the empire.